Alright, so my in-cockpit audio didn't record, so we're stuck with the voiceover today. On this particular flight, my home airport's gas tank was out of commission, so we had to go to the next airport over in Turner's Falls to get some gas. I'm flying with Gary, who I met through YouTube here, and he actually used to fly this very same Cessna 152 back in the 80s. He decided to come along and see what we can do today. It's about a 20-minute flight up to Turner's Falls, and we had a pretty uneventful landing. Although we did note that the crosswinds were starting to build up and get a little gusty. Here we are talking to the attendant at Turner's Falls who was going to fill us up with gas. I actually didn't get his name, but I had an interesting conversation. One of the things we talked about was that they sometimes get fairly large turbine helicopters that come into that small airport, which I actually have video of from a couple years ago. It turns out that it's probably due to their proximity to Deerfield Academy, which is a fairly prestigious private high school about 10 miles to the west of that airport. So you sometimes get everything from Middle Eastern royal families to rich people from New York City. It's kind of an interesting little side note because there really would be no other reason for a 3,000 foot runway in the middle of nowhere to carry Jet A fuel. Okay, here's where things get a little interesting. While we were filling up with gas, the wind was picking up and we decided not to go on with our plans for a $100 brunch. And instead, let's just head back to Northampton before the crosswinds get too strong. While coming off of runway 16 here in Turner's Falls, you're heading right into the hills. And what the crosswind was coming from the south, which is kind of to your right on this runway. And what would happen is you get a lot of burbles and wind shifts right as you're taking off. Now we are right at the max gross weight for the 152 with full fuel and two grown men in there. And right about here in just a second, I hit some turbulence that really actually had me thinking that it was wind shear, but in some analysis of the flight, I don't think it's actual wind shear. But basically, my airspeed dropped from about 75 knots to 60 knots without any change in pitch and without any change in altitude. In fact, I was struggling to climb at all while losing airspeed. So I ended up, I did check the RPM, good RPMs. The engine was running well. So I just kind of pushed forward on the nose and gave up a little altitude to get back to VY airspeed. You can see here the spot where I start to lose a little bit of altitude. And at this point it is on purpose because I was just fighting for airspeed. And yeah, I did kind of drift into the crosswind to the right on this projection here. You can see from this graphic here from ForeFlight that right about here I'm losing about 10 knots of airspeed, followed by a slight drop in altitude as I pushed forward. I've done a little research on what exactly the definition of wind shear is, and I'll include a link to a PDF from the FAA. Some references to wind shear requires that you have at least a 15 knot decrease in speed that can't be explained by typical flight attitude alone. And my drop was closer to about 10 knots. So by that definition, what happened didn't qualify as wind shear. So maybe it was just some pretty strong turbulence as we were just getting into the air coming over those hills. But it was a little hairy. And so the 152 doesn't really have a lot of extra horsepower to just kind of power through the loss of airspeed. So my only choice was to exchange altitude for airspeed. The most important thing is to keep the plane flying at the proper airspeed. Once we got out of that turbulent area and I turned crosswind, as about 300 feet AGL on the crosswind, the 152 returned to a normal 500 foot per minute rate of climb. So our return flight back to Northampton was pretty normal, although it was a little bumpy. So clearly we knew that we'd be dealing with probably some crosswinds on landing. On my initial approach, there were some pretty strong crosswinds, and I came in a little bit high and a little fast, and I decided to go around. And as I was in the pattern going around for the second attempt, I actually made the decision that if I had to go around again, I would divert to another airport with more runway options. With this crosswind, I decided to go no more than 3 notches of flap and keep my airspeed up. And here on my second attempt, you can see on short final, I had a pretty good burst of left crosswind, and I had to do a fair amount of correction to maintain runway heading. But I was able to level off and make a fairly decent landing. That definitely was the most crosswind I want to land in a 152. So another flight in the books, and every flight is a learning opportunity. And so I've done a lot of reading up on wind shear, whether or not I actually experienced wind shear on this flight. And, helped me to revisit things. It's a good idea to revisit personal minimums and to always have your plans for which airport to divert to in different situations. So, yeah, there it is. Short flight, but had a good time and, learned a few things.